the Old Testament. We've lost many people on this journey. So, Kevin, I don't know who is Zooming, but for the Zoomers, you disembodied spirits among us today are let's see, we've got seven. We have seven embodied souls here in the classroom who are working through the Old Testament. And so, what's that, Kev? Eight. Well, me too. So, uh, and so we are going to continually advance in how God's plan of redemption is restoring what Adam in his sin has lost. I have a handout. Kevin, if you don't have a handout, do you? Daniel, can you give Kevin a handout? Now, as we have,
You should have one on the desk there.
okay, all right, girls, y'all want one? Yeah. We have seen that the Hebrew Bible, and it's true for the whole Bible, it is a theological narrative. That is, it is a story, and the hero of the story is God. And it is a story that very clearly there is evil, and there's evil in two realms. There's evil in the angelic realm, and there is evil in the human realm. And what sometimes is being narrated for us, revealed to us at the level of human beings, God's people, and his enemies, is not all that actually is being accomplished. It seems as if things are being thwarted. It seems as if fellowship with God is being ruined, when in fact we will see that what the Bible teaches us is that God actually has recovered and is bringing to pass an even better Eden, where God will make a place where he will be present among his people forever. And we saw that Genesis begins this, and we have a key promise that is made to us in Genesis chapter 12, repeated again in Genesis chapter 15. And that has been the hope of Israel as we've moved with Abraham's descendants at the end of Genesis when they are in Egypt. And they actually become a nation that he ushers, you might remember, through Joshua all the way into Canaan. And in Canaan, we have seen that there was a period of time where the existing leadership of judges, they are the only leaders in the time of Canaan after Joshua dies. And it was not good during the time of the judges. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And God is raising up these judges who indeed are not exemplary leaders. And yet God in his mercy provides for Israel in Canaan through the transitionary leadership of the judges. But you might remember in Samuel, we are introduced to two, in one sense, surprising realities. The first reality is explicitly said to us: who was king in Israel before there was any human anointed king of Israel? I'll take you there. This will develop as we go forward in the Old Testament. But when you go to 1 Samuel, so go ahead and turn there. We're able to see that Samuel, this incredibly unique son of Hannah, he becomes Yahweh's prophet, and he is the one who is called to anoint the king. But this is, in one sense, God dealing with the sinful desires of Israel. Because what Israel wanted is what the nations had. And what they wanted was a human king like the pagan nations to rule over them. But in this, we were able to learn that actually God was the king of Israel. So look at verse 7 in 1 Samuel 8. But the thing was evil in the sight of Samuel when they said, give us a king. I'm sorry, that's verse 6. Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to Yahweh. Then Yahweh said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. like all the deeds which they have done since the day I brought them up from Egypt, even to this day, in that they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. So now listen to their voice, however, you shall solemnly testify to them and tell them of the custom of the king who will reign over them. So we learn in Israel's request for a human king, who was the king of Israel before any man anointed king? Yahweh was the king of Israel. And so, in wanting a human to be their king, they were rejecting God as their king. Now, was this a new development in the heart of Israel? No, this is the continuation, according to Yahweh, of what has been the common denominator in Israel, that they have forsaken Yahweh and they serve other gods. Now, up to this point, we have been seeing that the covenant that God made with Israel through Moses at Sinai, was it merciful of God? That is to say, did they merit the relationship God covenanted with them? That he would be their God and they would be his people, that they would be his holy nation and they would become a kingdom of priests to the rest of the nation. Did they do anything that earned that relationship with God?
No way.
No way. But has that covenant been effective? Has it actually done the work in Israel such that Israel would do what we've been told by Moses really was the essence of that relationship? Deuteronomy 7 is a keynote place, that they would love the Lord their God. Is the covenant that Yahweh made with Israel at Sinai through Moses, is it bringing this change in Israel? No, not through Moses, not when they were at Sinai, because even when they came down, this will come up again, they already had broken the law that Moses is toting down to tell them about. Then when they no longer have Moses, but rather they come into Canaan, they have Joshua. Are they any different? No different. What do you think is going to be the case when we see they have this king? Will Israel be different? So with every change, and we might say with every progression within the relationship God has with his, and this is the right term, covenant people. Because is Israel in a covenant relationship with God? Yes. In every progression, in every development, we sort of have an anticipated sort of hope. Are they going to be different? Is this next development going to change the heart of Israel? And you may remember in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6, what really needs to happen for Israel to change in relationship to Yahweh? They need to have circumcised hearts. The heart, Moses teaches us, is the key to loving God, and loving God is the key to obeying his commandments. And so we were waiting, is this going to be the change in heart? And so we saw that Israel rejects Yahweh as king. They want a human to be their king because that's what the nations have. And so God gives them their desire, and their desire begets for them a king who is like them, and Samuel was that king. He was indeed physically impressive. He was handsome. And he was a sinner. He was unfaithful. He disobeyed God. And because of his sin, God took the house, that is the dynasty, from him and gave it to another. And this other king is really the antitype to Solomon. I'm sorry, the antitype to Samuel. And there we see in 2 Samuel 7, God with David now not only anoints David king over Israel, but he also makes a covenant with David that David's house, that you could say the dynasty of a Davidic king, is going to bring a son who will build a temple for Yahweh, and he is also going to rule forever. Now, that then establishes this is the third covenant after the covenant with Abraham. So we had the covenant with Abraham, and it was unilateral. We had the covenant that was with Israel through Moses, and it was conditional. Now we have in David's covenant that there is another covenant that requires God to keep his promises. God to keep his promises. And we now come from 2 Samuel into the book of Kings. In our Bible, we will call it 1st and 2nd Kings, but in the Hebrew Bible, it was just the book of Kings. What's going to be helpful is when you're reading Kings, you need to understand that at the end of 2nd Kings, you come to the midway point in the Hebrew Bible. So you're halfway through. So in that sense, we have developed the questions that emerge through the progression of covenant relationships, covenant promises that come in those relationships. And we've had anticipations rise, and so far, every one of those anticipations have been deflated. And so here at the halfway point, we're going to see that indeed we're going to have a rise of our anticipation that maybe in this Davidic son, there is going to be a king who will bring about fulfillment of those promises that God has made. But we're going to find out that as soon, in one sense, we hit the high water mark of Solomon's reign, we're going to see that indeed he falls. And it will be a almost continual downward spiral. There'll be a few bright spots. We'll see that Judah will not be as bad as Israel. But at the end of it, it seems as if the darkness is overtaking all of Israel and then Judah. And then we'll see there will be a fractured light of Davidic hope at the very end of Kings. So I have 8 ways that we can summarize the progression of the book of Kings. So we'll take them one by one. If you have questions, just raise your hand. But this is going to be a pretty fast tour through the book of Kings. First, in the book of Kings, we are told in verse 1 that King David was old, advanced in age, and they covered him with clothes, but he could not keep warm. We're not going to get into the details, but in one sense, this opening narrative is just telling us that David is coming to the end of his life, which means David and his literal rule is coming to its end. And the question emerges in the first 2 chapters, who is going to be the son who will succeed his father to the throne. And we are able in verse 5 to see, in one sense, the expected son who would take David's throne upon his death. Now, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. So he prepared for himself a chariot and horsemen and 50 men as runners before him. But his father had never grieved him at any time by asking, why have you done so? And he was also a very handsome man in form, and he was born after Absalom. And he had confirmed with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and following Adonijah, they helped him. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shemaiah, Rai, and the mighty men who belonged to David were not with Adonijah. And Adonijah sacrificed sheep and oxen and fatlings by the stone of Zeheleth, which is beside En Rogel, and he invited all his brothers, the king's son, and all the men of Judah, the king's servants. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, the mighty men, and Solomon his brother. Now, in one sense, when you would assess things from a political, man-centered frame, this seems to be the king. This seems to be the son who would take the throne. Obviously, does he have ambition? Yes. Does he look the part? Yes. Now, I will address you ladies. All right. I am most grateful for youthful students. And so you are the most youthful of all of our students. And so there's a lot of little lessons. They're not the main point of the passage, but there's these little lessons. It's true in our country as well. If someone doesn't look like president, if he doesn't look presidential, do you think he's going to be elected to be president? He won't. It doesn't matter the gifts that he has. He must look the part. Adonijah looked the part. Adonijah had obviously skill in political maneuvering. He could leverage the people that he needed to leverage so that he could present himself as this seems like the son who will take the throne. But it's very clear who was he not interested in? Those who actually feared God. Those who were faithful to the kind of kingdom and the throne that David had, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the mighty men. And then we're told about this other brother of his, Solomon. In verse 11, we see that Nathan spoke to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, he's asking Bathsheba about Adonijah, and asked, does David our Lord not know of it? And so here what we're able to see is that the strange thing is actually that Adonijah does not become king, but rather what David does is he anoints Solomon to be his king. Now this comes in verse 32. King David said, call to me Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and they came into the king's presence. And the king said to them, take with you the servants of your Lord, and have my son Solomon ride on my own mule, and bring him down to Gihon. And Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet shall anoint him there as king over Israel, and blow the trumpet, and say, long live King Solomon. Then you shall come up after him, and he shall come and sit on my throne, and he shall be king in my place, for I have commanded him to be ruler over Israel and Judah. Then Benaiah the son of Jehoiada answered the king and said, amen. Thus may Yahweh, the God of my Lord, the king, say, as Yahweh has been with my Lord the king, so may he be with Solomon, and make his throne greater than the throne of my Lord King David. And so they execute this. Now, I would just want to, there's just a few observations that because politics and thoughts about tradition and the way in which all nations that have been shaped by the Bible think about these things, did it seem incidental to David that the right men need to be gathered and publicly conduct the ceremony that would anoint Solomon as the replacement to King David? Was it incidental, meaning did it matter, or did it not matter? It mattered. All right, so my 3 young students, protocol, traditional ceremonies, whether they be in politics or in families or in churches, they matter. And for those who do not understand them, or even worse, for those who sort of critique them, you need to understand that those are fools, or maybe worse, revolutionaries. And so here David understands that, and David is making clear that he wants the people to be able to see that it is Solomon whom David has commanded to take his throne. Now, what is amazing about this is because this is Bathsheba's son. And so this would not be the one that you would expect to be king. And in that sense, this is I'm going to call him strange. This is a strange selection, that Solomon is the son of David who succeeds David to the throne. And then when we look at chapter 3, this strange son who now is on the throne, he makes a strange request. And Yahweh appears in verse 5 of chapter 3. Yahweh appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, ask what I should give you. Now, just imagine if Yahweh appeared to any one of us and he said the same question, how you answer that question is going to reveal what about you or what about me. It's in a dream. It's not before everyone. It is just you and God. What do you think your answer is going to show about yourself?
What you most desire.
Yeah, it's going to show the desire of your heart. Now, we have waiting over us in one sense. The covenant promise that we read about in 2 Samuel 7, we call it the Davidic covenant. That becomes, in one sense, this new shadow. Like Sinai, you may remember I said Sinai is a shadow over Israel as they enter into the wilderness and even as they are in the land of Canaan. The law is this domineering shadow because it just condemns. Israel is constantly failing to keep the law. Well, the Davidic covenant is going to be, in one sense, like an antitype to the law, and there's going to be, in one sense, a light that kind of functions in sort of the opposite way as the shadow of the law, to where Israel indeed is a dark people, but the Davidic covenant promises are like light that sort of laces through this dark people and their sins. And so we have this great emphasis of the Davidic covenant. And here is that son of David, whom we are waiting because of the Davidic covenant to see, is this the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant? Is this the son of David who is going to establish God's rule over Israel and over all nations forever? So we have this pregnant anticipation, and this question comes to him. Ask what I should give to you. Now, one of the things that, if we went back, and I thought we might read it, but I'm taking too long. One of the warnings that was given to Israel about a king is, what would the king do with the people and the people's resources? This is well, quickly, just because I'm most interested in these three young students that are in front of me. When you say that a nation has a monarchy, you're talking about that nation's kind of what? Kind of leader, but in this sense, the kind of leader in their government. So a monarchy is the type of government. Just in case we're wondering, monarchies are not evil. Jesus is a king. And so monarchies are God's chosen form of government. But there's a problem with monarchies. The problem is not the government. The problem is the person who would have the office of king. And so one of the warnings that was given to Israel is that when you get a king, do you know what the king is going to do? Verse 11. This is chapter 8 of 1 Samuel. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself in his chariots and among his horsemen, and they will run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and fifties, and some to do his plowing and to reap his harvest and to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will also take your daughters for perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive groves and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your seed and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will also take your male slaves and your female slaves and your best young men and your donkeys and use them for his work. He will take a tenth of your flocks. You yourself will become his slaves. All right. You'll cry out, but he will not listen to the people. All right. So in this sense, what are they told? Kings are going to do what? They're going to exploit you. They're going to exploit you. Well, here's what this strange son, Solomon, who is now king over Israel, this is what he asks God to give him. You have shown great loving kindness to your slave David, my father, according to how he walked before you in truth and righteousness and rightness of heart towards you, and you have kept for him this great loving kindness that you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. Now, that word loving kindness in the Legacy Standard Bible, I think, might be translated in the ESV as steadfast love. All right, it is this covenant love of God. All right, it is in keeping the covenant promise. And so, what is Solomon citing back to God in verse 6? Well, in verse 6, he's first saying, God, you have been faithful to your covenant promises to my father David. God, you have been faithful to do what you promised to my father David. And he attributes to God all of the good things in his father. Then in verse 7, so based upon God's character of faithfulness to his covenant promises, verse 7, so now, O Yahweh my God, you have made your slave king in place of my father David, yet I am but a little child, and I do not know how to go out or to come in. That's an incredible phrase. Is Solomon at this point humble in heart before God? He's basically saying, I am ignorant. So he then asks, and your slave is in the midst of your people, which you have chosen, a numerous people who are too many to be numbered or counted. So give your slave a listening heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this glorious people of yours? What did he ask for? All right, wisdom, but particularly the phrase that is used there. But discern between what? Now, has there been another man in another really special place who was reigning and ruling over the place that God had provided for him, in one sense, as a king of God over creation, that he reached out and sought to know good and evil? Adam. But how did Adam seek knowledge of good and evil? Through disobedience. So here we have Solomon, in one sense, as like another Adam. Because Solomon, we're going to see, is actually in the land of Canaan, and he rules over all of the promised borders. Israel and Judah, they are united. This is the Davidic son, according to the Davidic promise. And he is like Adam. He is in that place that God has provided. He is ruling as king over God's place, God's people. And unlike Adam, he doesn't sin to get a knowledge of good and evil. He humbly asks God, would you give me the ability to discern between good and evil? Now, what does this do for us? Because we have another promise, don't we, from Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Who are we waiting to arrive onto the scene of the world that will crush the serpent's head? The son, the seed of woman. And here's a special seed, a special son from Bathsheba. And this also seems to be in fulfillment to the Davidic covenant. And we're going to see he's going to build a temple, and that temple is not going to just be for Israel, but all nations to come and to fear the Lord, which may also seem to kind of trigger for us expectations of fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise. And all of this is hinging in this particular son of David who just humbly asks God for wisdom. And how might he use the wisdom, this knowledge, to discern between good and evil that he sought not through sin, but rather through humble petition? What does he want to use this wisdom for? Verse 9. To judge this glorious people of yours. Now, why in the world would this people be called glorious? I mean, is there anything that we've read in the actions and deeds of Israel that would say they are glorious? Like, does the Bible give us information that would make us think, Oh, Israel, by the time we get to 1 Kings chapter 3, they are a glorious people. Solomon clearly sees the people Israel through the lens of what they are in relationship to God according to his covenants. And so this is an amazing man who's really quite young, and he is humbly asking God to give him this strange request of the knowledge of good and evil so that he might serve God's people by being able to judge as their king. And verse 10 tells us that this was pleasing in the sight of the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God says to him, because you have asked this thing and have not asked for yourself long life, nor have asked for riches for yourself, nor have you asked for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself discernment to listen to justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. Behold, I have given you a wise and discerning heart, so that there has been no one like you before you, nor shall one be like you, nor shall one like you arise after you. I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there will not be any among the kings like you all your days. Now, if you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and commandments as your father David walked, then I will prolong your days. Then Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered burnt offerings, and made peace offerings, and made a feast for all of his servants. Now, clearly, what is this king also functioning as? At the very end, after he wakes up, what does he do?
Does priestly activities.
Priestly activities. And so when we come to the end of verse 15 in 1 Kings 3, we should be on the edge of our seat as we're reading through the Old Testament. The Tanakh at this point is giving us, like, we are rising at a rapid rate, wondering, is this fulfillment of God's redemptive promises in the seed of the woman who will crush the serpent's head? Is this the seed of Abraham, who indeed is going to make this nation great, but also bring a blessing to all the other nations? Is this the son of David who is going to reign over all the other tribes as well as nations, according to Balaam's prophecy? You might remember in Numbers. Is like, we're just really, really excited. This is the rise of the Davidic king, and not just Judah, but in the united kingdom, Israel and Judah. And so we're told about a number of ways in which he executes wisdom. We're told in chapter 4 that indeed he becomes so well known with his wisdom and wealth that he has international renown. We come to chapters 5 through 10, and we begin to see that he now advances not only with a greatness in the way of his riches and his strength and his military might, but in chapter 6 we come to see that he builds the temple, just as the Davidic covenant promised that he would build. And here we are able to say that it is the case that Solomon is a partial fulfillment of messianic promises that came in the Davidic covenant, because we read that literally that promised temple is literally built by the literal son Solomon. And here we see, verse 2 says, as for the house which King Solomon built for Yahweh, he then goes on to describe in detail this house. This is fulfillment in part, not in full, of the Davidic covenant of 2 Samuel 7. And these 38 verses narrate for us this supreme stature of Solomon as the wise son of David. But in chapter 7, we also are told that indeed this is the promised place where God's presence would dwell among his people, but it would not be only for his people. What also occurs to us is that there is a petitions that Solomon makes, and in these petitions Solomon gives 7, and it reveals how Solomon thinks of the temple. Solomon thinks of the temple as a place of divine justice. He thinks of the temple as a place for divine aid or help. He thinks of the temple as a place where there is divine forgiveness extended. But we also learn, and I want you to turn chapter 8, verses 43 and 60 reveal something else for us. Solomon thinks of this temple also as a place where God is going to be declared to all nations so that they might come to fear him. Starting verse 41 of chapter 8. Also concerning the foreigner who is not of your people Israel, if he comes from a far country for your name's sake, for they will hear of your great name and your strong hand and your outstretched arm. So if he comes and prays toward this house, listen in heaven, your dwelling place, and do according to all for which the foreigner calls to you, in order that all the peoples of the earth may know your name, to fear you, and to do your people Israel, and to know that your name is called upon this house which I have built. Right? So who does Solomon see benefiting from this temple and God's presence there? Just Israel? The nations. Now let's jump over to staying in chapter 8 to verse 60. I'll start in verse 59. And may these words of mine, with which I have made supplication before Yahweh, be near to Yahweh our God day and night, that he may do justice for his slave and justice for his people Israel, as each day requires, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that Yahweh is God. There is no one else. Let your heart, therefore, be wholly devoted to Yahweh our God, to his walk and his statutes, and to keep his commandments as at this day. So here what is revealed for us is indeed Solomon is that son of David who God promised would come and would build a house for God. But Solomon sees this temple as not only for God's glory to be manifest to and in Israel, but also so that all the nations may come and to fear Yahweh as the one true God. Now, that harkens back to Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, that there is a blessing to all nations that was going to come from the seed of Abraham. So at this point, we have the temple being built. Clearly, it is for Yahweh's glory in Israel, but it's not limited there. It extends to all the nations. And at this point, we have ascended to the Raz of this Davidic son, and therefore the Raz of Israel, the Raz of the tribe of Judah. And we are just wondering, is this the one? Is this that promised Messiah? But as quickly as it seems that the temple is completed, Solomon falls. And so in chapter 9, we're given that there is a warning to Solomon. And in this sense, we've seen God give warnings, haven't we? Did God give a law that included a warning to Adam? Did God give a warning to Cain? Did God give a warning to Israel repeatedly? Through Moses, through Joshua, through Samuel. And here we see God gives a warning to Solomon after he had completed the house of Yahweh and the king's house. And we see all that Solomon desired to do. Right? But this is the warning. I've heard your prayer and your supplication, which you have made before me. I've set apart as holy this house which you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. As for you, if you will walk before me as your father David walked in integrity of heart and uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded you, and will keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, just as I promised to your father David, saying, you shall not have a man cut off from the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons indeed turn away from following me, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have given before you, and go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them, and the house which I have set apart as holy for my name, I will cast out of my presence. So Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all the peoples. And this house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone who passes by will feel desolate and hiss and say, why has Yahweh done thus to this land and to this house? And they will say, because they forsook Yahweh their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and took hold of other gods and worshipped them and served them. Therefore, Yahweh has brought all this calamity on them. What's the warning? What does Solomon receive if he continues to walk in integrity of heart like his father David? Well, if he walks in integrity, then he and his house will rule forever. But if he is unfaithful and he commits idolatry, then Yahweh will ruin his house. Well, when we come to chapter 11, we find out that Solomon is not the long-awaited king. He is not that seed of Abraham, nor the seed of the woman. And we fall with Solomon. Verse 1 of 11 reads, now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from all the nations concerning which Yahweh had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not go along with them, nor shall they go along with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. So Solomon now falls after the temple has been constructed, and it begins with his polygamy and his multiple wives from pagan peoples. From this sin, it moves over to the sin of idolatry. In chapter 12, we're able to see that the proverb, here's another one for you young students in the class. Have you ever heard like priests like people? Well, it also functions when it comes to kings. So goes the king, so goes the country. So Solomon, as the king, is the one who commits himself to idolatry as he gave himself over to foreign wives. And in chapter 12, we're able to see that now the country suffers from not only Solomon's sins, but chiefly Solomon's sins, but also they themselves devote themselves to idolatry. So in verse 16 of chapter 12, we see the kingdom is divided. Then all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, so the people responded to the king with this word, saying, what portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to your own house, David. So Israel went to their tents. But as for the sons of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. And the king Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was over the forced labor, and all Israel stoned him, and he died. And King Rehoboam made haste to mount his chariots and to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. So here we see that Solomon's sins led to sins among the people, which led to a division of the kingdom. And so there is a split between the tribes of Israel. There are 10 tribes that make up the kingdom of the north called Israel, and there are 2 tribes which make up Judah, the kingdom in the south. Now, what's going to take place is for the rest of the book of Kings, we kind of toggle back and forth between these now 2 nations. The kingdom has split, it has divided, and so we go back and forth. Now, again, you remember, what is this light that kind of pierces through the darkness after the Davidic covenant? That promise of a Davidic son. Right? So, what's going to be the fundamental difference between what we see happening in Israel and what we see happening in Judah is not based upon, well, Israel is like the worst, and then Judah is the good guys. That's not what is going to be the fundamental difference between the two. Rather, what is going to be the difference is Yahweh will be faithful to his covenant promises. And we will see that manifest in Israel, namely through 2 major prophets, Elijah and Elisha. But when it comes to Judah, we will see it will be this light of the Davidic covenant. It will be this hope for this king who is like David. So, who then is the kind of hero and hope as we go into the dark ages of Israel and Kings? It's Yahweh. It's God's character and his faithfulness to his covenant promises. So when we go forward with 1 Kings 13 and 14, a new model arises for kingship in Israel, and it's with Jeroboam. This is an antitype. What David is, Jeroboam is the opposite. So David is the type of the king that is Israel's hope. Jeroboam is the antitype. He is the opposite of what a king whose heart is after God's heart. Jeroboam is a king whose heart is opposed to God. And so Jeroboam is the evil, idolatrous king, and he becomes the king of Israel to the north. And you might remember when Moses came down from Sinai, Aaron was leading Israel in idolatry, and he had formed a golden calf for them to worship. And he blames it on the people. Well, if you were going to be doubly evil, what might you do? In one sense, to foster idolatry. If Aaron was just sort of a single dose of evil, if you were going to be doubly evil in Israel, what would you do? 2 calves, right? Let's be capitalists about this. Let's make sure that we don't just have one location for our idolatrous purposes and services to Israel. Let's create 2 places for idolatry. And so Jeroboam sets up in Dan and in Bethel 2 calves for Israel to come and to commit idolatry. And so the end of chapter 12 narrates for us this idolatry that arises from Jeroboam's heart. Look at verse 26. So you can see this is the antitype king in Israel from David. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will return to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 golden calves, and he said to them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, that brought you up from the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and one he put in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. And he made houses on the high places and made priests from among all the people who were not of the sons of Levi. Now, let's skip down to verse 33. Then he went up to the altar which he had made in Bethel on the 15th day in the 8th month, even in the month which he had devised in his own heart. And he made a feast for the sons of Israel and went up to the altar to burn incense. This is the antitype of the king that will be Israel and Judah's hope. All right. Israel to the north as this new model of kingship. And Jeroboam, in one sense, is the one that all the evil kings within Israel will be like and compared to. We then see that there's a little trickle of a promise that comes in chapter 13, verse 2. A man of God from Judah, not an accident, to Bethel by the word of Yahweh while Jeroboam was standing in the altar to burn incense. Verse 2, and he cried against the altar by the word of Yahweh and said, O altar, altar, thus says Yahweh, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David. Josiah is his name, and on you he shall sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you, and human bones will be burned on you. Then he gave a miraculous sign the same day, saying, this is the miraculous sign which Yahweh has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be torn apart, and the ashes which are on it shall be poured out. So a prophecy is given. God's divine judgment is announced or heralded to sinful Israel, and that is the way in which God's faithfulness, his covenant faithfulness, is working within sinful Israel. It's going to be through the herald of prophets that pronounce divine judgment to Israel for their sins. Well, this prophecy about Josiah is fulfilled 200 years later. But until then, we are able to see that Israel and Judah's exile now continues. And so that takes us from 1 Kings chapter 15, really all the way through 2 Kings. And here it is a narration in one sense. Israel becomes like Canaan. One person I read said this is Israel being Canaanized. They become like Sodom, except in one sense you could say that they're worse. And one of the low marks comes through Ahab and Jezebel to usher in a new level of evil in chapter 16. In verses 29 through 34, Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh more than all who were before him. All right, so we read of this new level that Israel comes to. And what happens there is that we're able to see that the only thing that sort of shows that God has not forsaken his relationship and the promises of that relationship to Israel is these two prophets who show up, Elijah and Elisha. Now, chapters 18 and 19, they narrate for us 17, 18, and 19, they narrate for us the way in which Elijah interacts with the sinful nation of Israel. And it's akin to Moses, but there are some significant differences. One of the differences, when Moses petitioned Yahweh for Israel, was Moses sympathetic as a mediator for Israel? He was. Elisha is going to kind of constantly pity himself. Elijah. Elijah is going to pity himself, and we're going to see in chapter 19 that he, after this, in one sense, a high watermark of his ministry, he's going to hit a low mark, and he is going to think that he is the only one who is faithful to Yahweh in Israel, when that is not the truth at all. And so one of the things that emerges is that, yes, God's heralding of judgment and the signs that are manifest that Elijah is Yahweh's man and he is proclaiming Yahweh's message to sinful Israel. It is marked by Elijah's sort of constant consideration that he is the only one who fears the Lord. When in fact, we learn in the first 14 verses of chapter 19 that actually Yahweh has 7,000 who have not bowed their knee to Baal. And so one of the things that we're able to see is not apparent to us. It obviously was not apparent to Elijah. That though evil seems to be triumphing, God still has those who fear him, even though Elijah was not able to see it. Israel, however, despite God's faithfulness to announce his judgment to them, Israel moves deeper and deeper into sin, ultimately to bring them to exile. One king, Jehu, rises up, and we see this in 2 Kings chapter 9 and 10. He rises up and he sort of puts the brake through a reform, but this does not change Israel's heart. So all it does is it sort of slows Israel's eventual exile from the land because of their failure to keep covenant with Yahweh. 2 Kings chapter 17 narrates this for us. This, in one sense, exile of Israel after the ministry of Elijah and Elisha, what does it beg us to ask? If God has sent Elijah and Elisha, and God indeed had them announce his message, and God gave signs that signified this man speaks for me. And yet, despite their ministry, Israel fails to keep covenant and is eventually exiled. What would that seem to say about the ministry of Elijah and Elisha?
It seems to say it was not effective.
That's right. It seems at this point, at the end of 2 Kings 17, it was in vain. That their ministry and their words, that was pointless. And so again, we rose with Israel with Solomon. Now we are falling with Israel, even though we see God continuing to herald his word to them through these two prophets. Let's turn to Judah. Is Judah going to be any different? Judah is going to fall just the same, and they will fall for the same reason. However, there is a hope that exists in Judah because of the Davidic covenant. That's the defining difference between Judah and Israel. And I gave you just some short facts. There's a little chart on the top of page 67. So in about 200 years in Israel, the northern kingdom, they had 20 kings. And they had 10 dynasties. In Judah, they had 21 kings in about 400 years. Right? It's generally the case that what's best for nations is that they are stable. You find Judah is more stable than Israel. You also find that there was only one dynasty to rule the nation of Judah in contrast to the 10 in Israel, indicating, does the Davidic covenant have a difference in the nation of Judah compared to the nation of Israel? It does. It does. It's not that Judah is different. It's the covenant promise that was given to Judah, that there is this merciful, restraining work of God in Judah because of the Davidic covenant. We'll see evidences of that. Jerry, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, not to go down the rabbit trail, but in 2 Kings 17, 19, beginning there, at the end, it says he had cast them out of his sight. How do we interpret that? He rejected all the descendants of Israel and afflicted them and gave them into the hand of plunderers until he had cast them out of his sight.
You said
19. Sorry.
you said 1 Kings 17,
Second Kings.
2
Second
Kings.
Kings 17, 19. How does it mean when he, how do we interpret that?
Well, one, what we're going to see is, how about we get to the end, Jerry? Let me see. Let's see how Kings is going to bring about conclusion and anticipation of future hope, and I think that's how we're going to have to answer it. So, one of the evidence that you see in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 29 through 39, David is the reason that there is a hope extended to Judah that is not extended to Israel. Similarly, in verse 32 of that same chapter, Solomon's sins do not cancel out the Davidic covenant promises. So why would God, in that sense, extend mercy to both Solomon and to Judah in a way that he doesn't to the kings of the north? Well, the answer is because of God's covenant promises to David. God is relating to Solomon and to Judah because of the relationship God has with David. Israel does not have that because of they are not relating to Yahweh through the promised covenant relationship that comes through the tribe of Judah through this in this Davidic covenant. Now, this is similar in one sense what we've talking about in Genesis. We have problems in one sense with saying, okay, if Adam is our representative and he sinned and we sin in him, how is it that God chooses to relate to us on the basis of this man whom we weren't there? We didn't make the choice that Adam made in the garden. Why are we considered to be in Adam? And in one sense, we can give answers for it, but I would first want to lead into this. If God reveals in his word that this is the way he relates to people, I think the highest ground for us to stand on is we should take God at his word. We should come to learn that God does reveal in his word that he does relate to his redeemed people according to relationships that he establishes in these covenant redemptive promises. So that if he likewise makes a promise of redemption, that we receive all of those benefits through one man whom we are united to, but yet we didn't do anything that man did, then we come to understand redemption also is ours through nothing that we did, but rather through God judging us to be in this other man. So this is one of the ways in which the Old Testament is absolutely fundamental to a Christian understanding of one's relationship to God. Because the gospel communicates things to us that are built on this chassis. If God relates to Judah because of the covenant that he made with David, if God relates to Solomon based off the covenant that he made with David, and God remains faithful to the promises that he gave to David such that they benefit even when they do not deserve to because of those covenant promises to David, is God not right in treating these people mercifully because of those covenant promises to David? He is. So too, when a sinner is extended forgiveness of sin and reconciliation to God, that you will be counted righteous because Jesus was, when in fact you're not. On what chassis does that make sense when it comes to an individualistic, atheistic, autonomous view of individuals in relationship to their creator? It's not built on that chassis. That's not the framework for which the gospel is built. The gospel is built on this kind of framework. And so, even seeing how God is relating to Judah in a way that he doesn't relate to Israel because of the Davidic covenant enables us to see when God genuinely offers the gospel promises to us on the basis of his relationship to Jesus Christ, then we can know I can receive those and they can truly be mine, though I have merited nothing of it. simply because of the promises God has made in Jesus Christ, which are called the new covenant. So
you're not using the term, but you mean that you're talking about the federal head idea.
yes, yeah, you could say that the chassis that we see clearly moving through the Old Testament from the garden, and now even as we're working through Israel, is that God makes promises in covenant relationships such that those who are related to the one that God made that covenant and its promises with, they benefit. They benefit when indeed God is giving them mercy when they should receive judgment, but on the basis of that covenant, Solomon, Judah, they're receiving God's favor. Why? Because God chose to make a covenant with David. Why does Israel receive this kind of treatment? Because God covenanted with Abraham. Israel entered into the covenant with Yahweh at Sinai through Moses. So they are receiving these things. Why? Because God made those promises. So this is practically important because Christian, why do you receive the blessings of the gospel?
I'll say because Christ is our federal head.
Because God promised to him that all those who are his receive these promises. Jesus accomplished all that was necessary in order to ratify, to establish the new covenant with all of its benefits so that those who are in relationship to God through Christ receive all of those benefits. And is there anything that you ever did or do not or don't do that would somehow change your relationship to, in that case, Jesus, this mediator? No. You didn't do anything to receive them. God made this covenant that hinges upon Jesus, his person and his work, such that these are yours because of your relationship to God in him. Just like we'll see Judah has some of these benefits because God made a covenant with David. So Elisha and Elisha are the instruments of hope within Israel, but David is the key to the hope of Judah in the dark times of the Kings. 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 19, chapter 14 verse 3, chapter 16 verse 2, chapter 18 verse 3, chapter 19 verses 32 through 34, and chapter 22 verse 2 all reveal that the hope hinges upon God's promises to David. The Davidic covenant is the grounds for God's merciful relationship to Judah in the time of sinful kings. Judah therefore receives merciful treatment from Yahweh because of his covenant promises to David. Again, check out 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 19. So David is being held out as the hope for Judah. Thus, the framework for hope in Judah is God's fidelity to his promises made in his covenant with David, which is different than saying David is the hope. No, David is the one with whom God made those covenant promises, but the faithfulness or fidelity of God to those covenant promises made with David, that is the foundation of Israel's hope, even during the dark time of kings. When Ahab's daughter in 2 Kings 11 takes control of Judah after King Ahaziah dies, what do you think she wants to do? She wants to end David's line. You can look at the first 3 verses in 2 Kings chapter 11. Now that harkens back to what is the ongoing enmity between the promised seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent? War. And we've seen over and over again what do in one sense the seeds of the serpent, what are they always seeking to kill? They're seeking to kill the sons of the promised line of redemption. So here, Ahab's daughter seeks to end the Davidic line because indeed she knows that it is the Davidic covenant that's how redemption is going to happen. And so Moses, before and afterwards we see Jesus. Joash is raised up, and he comes in like Moses against Aaron, and he bashes these warring seeds of the serpent against God's promised seed of redemption. And so we see this back and forth within Israel and within Judah. New light arises in that promised son of David, Josiah, in chapter 13 of First Kings, but it's fulfilled in Second Kings chapter 2. Josiah is given incomparable compliments to all other kings within Israel. He does what he was promised to do. He purges idolatry from Judah. No king is given the description that Josiah is given in chapter 23. And this is the rise of this long awaited light in Judah. And again, we might have this rekindled messianic hope with Josiah's rise. Is this now the son of David who will bring the kingdom? But Josiah's reform is external. And we learn at the verses 16 through 20 in chapter 22 that Josiah can only suspend God's judgment in Judah. He is unable to change the hearts of those in Judah. And with his death, Jerusalem ushers in its demise. And in chapter 25, exile ensues in Jerusalem. This seems to be a crushing blow to God's promises. Judah is exiled. The Davidic seed seems to be crushed under the foot of the serpent seed that is now Babylon. And the prophets will come to reveal that this judgment of God upon Judah for its sin against Yahweh is actually the tree, so to speak, being chopped down, but leaving a stump. Isaiah 6, verse 13 calls this that. This now is the stump of Judah. Ezekiel likens this to a valley of dry and lifeless bones. Isaiah 42, verse 3 reveals that the lamp, though indeed dimmed, is not out. At the end of 2 Kings, we have light. So we'll conclude, and this, Jerry, is the answer in part to your question.
Would you call that stump a remnant?
Yeah, we'd have to say there is a remnant. I want you to read. I want us to read the last section of Kings, verses 27 through 30. Now it happened in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison, and he spoke to him good words, and he set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence continually all the days of his life. And for his allowance, a continual allowance was given him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life. Now, some Old Testament scholars judge this to be negative. I do not think that we need to read this as negative, but rather as positive. For we now know, though Judah is exiled in Babylon, though the seed of David has been carried away into Babylon, what do we learn at the end of Kings? Is the seed crushed? No. He actually has been seen, preserved, and favored by the king of Babylon. God indeed has preserved the seed of David, and Jehoiakim represents the hope not only for Israel's future, but also for that of the world. A Davidite still has a throne. The lamp has not been extinguished. Stephen Dempster, to whom I am totally indebted for this understanding of Kings, concludes. This is the halfway point to the Hebrew Bible. When we come midway through the Hebrew Bible, this is what we know. Is the hope of Israel in Sinai, in the law, in the Mosaic covenant? Is the hope of Israel God's faithfulness to his promises to Abraham and to David? When we open up the New Testament, what does the first verse tell us Jesus is? Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of Abraham, the son of David. That promised hope of Israel has been given, and it is Jesus Christ. Salvation has been accomplished. Redemption has been achieved. Sinners can be forgiven. God can change hearts. You can be restored to God, brought into his presence in that final place where he will dwell with his people forever. But you need to come to this Son of David, right? Kings brings us right there. And we're going to see how this continues throughout the Hebrew Bible. So if you have questions, we can take it afterwards. Thanks for your patience to go an hour and a half. But we covered 1st and 2nd Kings. For those say we're going really slow, we just made a lot of ground. Y'all are dismissed.